Hi, everybody. I'm Christy Craig. I am the publisher here at Hidden Timber Books, and I want to invite you again to one of our small press author reading events. Thank you so much for being here on a Sunday afternoon. These events have been a lot of fun, and I'm really thrilled to have Clifford Garstang today with us to talk about his new novel, Oliver's Travels. Just to give you a little bit about Clifford Garstang, he is the author of several books of fiction, including his most recent novel, Oliver's Travels, which is published by Regal House Publishing, another small press. He is also the editor of the anthology of short fiction, the anthology called Short Fiction from a Small Planet. A former international lawyer, he lives in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. And welcome, Clifford. It's so great to have you today. Thanks for giving up your Sunday afternoon to just talk writing and life and all sorts of great things today for our hour together. I wondered if you might start by giving us just a little bit of information about who you are as a writer and how you came to write this book, Oliver's Travels.
Okay, thank you very much, Christy, for having me on this program, and thank you also on behalf of all small press authors for running this program. It's a great opportunity for people who don't get a lot of exposure to reach new audiences. So I really appreciate it, and thank you for having me. I always wanted to be a writer ever since I was a kid, and that was because of some of the things that I read both in school but also outside of school in high school. And I went to college to Northwestern. Hi, Gita. Thank you for being here. And studied philosophy there because I thought that would be good preparation for writing. And I think that it was, but it also turned out to be good preparation for practicing law. And I got kind of sidetracked from the writing ambition by first working overseas in the Peace Corps. And then because I wanted to pursue international work, I then got a law degree and was able to work with a big international law firm and worked in Singapore for almost 10 years. And I moved on. I worked at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., and spent a lot of time traveling, especially in East Asia. And that was all fantastic. I had a great experience as a lawyer and traveling as much as I did. But eventually my desire to be a fiction writer came back. And in about 2000, early 2001, I quit my job and moved to an ideal location for writing in the Shenandoah Valley, and started work. And I first was writing a novel as part of my MFA thesis, and finished that. And when I was done with that, I started writing short stories, partly because the novel was not getting any traction with agents or editors, and I wanted to have something to show for my work. So I was able to get some short stories published and just kept writing. So eventually I had enough stories for a story collection and then another story collection. And the second story collection won the Library of Virginia Award for Fiction, which was very nice for me. I felt like I was vindicated. That was also with another small press, Press 53. And it was just wonderful to have that recognition for that book. And then I launched into a novel, and I finally tapped into my early international experience with that novel. That was The Shaman of Turtle Valley, published by another small press, Braddock Avenue Books. And that was partly based in South Korea, which is where I had been a Peace Corps volunteer. So it was great to revisit Korea physically, literally. I went to Korea in 20, I'm not sure what year it was, to do some research for that novel. And it was really a fun, interesting book to write. And then I was able to turn my attention to Oliver's Travels, which began as a novel in Flash. I had this idea of writing lots of little short pieces about this character, Oliver, who, kind of like me, had spent his career traveling overseas and working for various companies and agencies. And so those Flash pieces were set in far-flung places: Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, lots of places where I had spent time either just traveling or for work. And so I had this idea of putting all that together as a collection of Flash pieces, but ultimately I felt that it wasn't really working. They were fun individual pieces, but as a collection, I wasn't loving it. So I don't really remember how I decided to do this, but I invented a writer character who writes those Flash pieces. So the main character in the Flash pieces was Oliver, and so I invented Ollie, who is a young, recent college graduate who wants to be a writer, and also is feeling sort of stuck in a boring life, and imagines himself, or imagines an alter ego for himself, who is this Oliver. So the exercise became a metafictional novel for me, and I ended up actually taking out from the novel all of the Flash pieces. They are referred to because Oliver, or Ollie, is writing them, and we see his thought process as he's thinking about this character Oliver in various places. And but I took them out, and some of them ended up in this book, which my background makes it difficult to show, but that's House of the Ancients and Other Stories. That's a collection of stories that came out in 2020 from Press 53. And one section of it is called Oliver's Travels, and it's the Flash pieces that I cut out of this novel. So that's how I got to this point. That's where this novel came from.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I have lots of questions. Just the fact that you even initially began thinking about writing a novel in Flash, that's a cool idea. I read an interview that you recently did about Oliver's Travels, and in there you talked about the fact that this novel grew from the several different Flash fiction stories. And so just looking at your background, you've written Flash fiction, short stories, novels, and there's a big difference between those very short pieces and then writing the novel, sort of like running a very short race and then running this marathon. And I'm curious, as you move through those three branches of fiction, do you find that you have to almost mentally prepare yourself in a different way, like you would train as a runner differently for those kinds of races or whatever? Or do you find that when you write through those other branches of fiction that they all lend their own techniques and skills into being able to write the novel itself, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And I might have answered this question differently like 10 years ago. But now I feel like with a short story, I have to plan more than I used to plan. Like, I'm in the middle of finalizing a new short story, and I actually thought about it a lot ahead of time, kind of like I was training for writing this story. The early stories that I wrote, I really would come up with a character and just write to see what would happen. It was like I was thinking out loud on paper. But now for this story, I felt like I wanted to have a particular structure, and I wanted to understand in advance what was going to go on. In contrast with a novel, I used to think, and I still think you get into trouble if you don't outline and plan for what's going to happen in the novel. But I feel it's more like going for a long run, not a race necessarily, but just putting on the shoes and getting out on the road and running to see where you end up. More like the way I used to write a short story. And as I say, that can get you into trouble. Because it's taken me, the book that I'm working on now, a new book, has taken me years and years and years because I didn't know until very recently where it was going. With Flash, Flash feels like it's not even a race so much as running around the yard. It's one definition of a Flash fiction is that it's a piece of prose that reveals what a character wants. It doesn't necessarily achieve a climax or a resolution, but it's just enough to let the reader imagine what happens next, what the conflict is, and how it might get resolved. In 500 words or whatever the Flash piece is, you don't have time to do all the things you do in other pieces of fiction. So yeah, they're very different, and I approach them all very differently.
I think it's interesting as we grow as writers, our strategies, like you're talking about, they sort of flip-flopped on how you approached it, writing certain things before and now. So let's talk a little bit more about Oliver's travels. I know one of the reviews mentioned that a theme in Oliver's travels is the fragility of memory. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about how memory works in this novel.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's maybe the heart of the story. Ollie has a memory of something that he can't quite see. He knows that something happened when he was younger, and he begins to remember details that suggest one thing, and that's what really drives him a little bit nuts, and it's what sets him off on this world tour to figure out. But he also gets into a number of discussions with various people, including his philosophy professor and his girlfriend, who then becomes his wife, about what we remember and the fact that memory can be so unreliable. I don't remember if Ollie says this in the book or not, but it's one reason why eyewitness testimony is not always solid proof in a legal case, a criminal case, because we don't always remember exactly what happened. So many things are happening at once, and we may be influenced by other things. So Ollie, who is a very logical person and wants to know the truth, he wants to know exactly what is real. So he really does explore that. So he really, in fact, at one point he talks to his philosophy professor about trying to reconstruct childhood memories and wondering if there isn't a way to do that, either through drugs or meditation or something like that.
Well, would you like to read an excerpt from the book?
Sure. Well, in fact, I was thinking there are a couple of places where Ollie and his philosophy professor talk about some of these things, not only memory, but also the nature of truth. So after Ollie graduates from college, he has moved in. First, he moves in very briefly with his father, and he doesn't get along with his father, so he moves in with his mother. They've been divorced for a while, and he has to figure out how to support himself, and he plans to get a teaching job, so he's thinking about teaching. As I consider the prospect of teaching, I realize how much I miss college, being a student. There was always a schedule, a map to follow, a plan and a goal, rules, places to be, a community, not to mention the excitement of learning, the constant exploration and discovery. It wasn't always easy. Every day was a challenge. Classes, papers, complicated texts, the concepts we were expected to master. Professor Russell, my philosophy teacher and mentor, made me think critically, made me question everything I thought I knew. What the textbooks said, what my parents told me, what everyone accepted as fact. Russell was tall and lean, not in an obviously athletic way, but sturdy and erect, like a tree, and he sometimes pulled his longish brown hair into a ponytail. He almost always wore a corduroy sport coat and a skinny tie, as if he was mocking the dress code for faculty at our pretentious little college with those thrift store finds. One day in my intro to philosophy class, he asked us, if I say I know something, does that mean the thing I say I know is true? Blank faces were the norm in that class. If the other kids were like me, they'd never been asked to really think before. I wanted to shake my head, but because no one else was moving, I held still. If the thing is demonstrably false, Russell persisted, then it isn't true. And how can it then be said to be known? He paused, greeted with more silence. Aren't all statements subject to doubt on some level? If a statement might not be true, how can I say I know it? In essence, then, nothing can be known. Put another way, my certainty that a statement is true does not logically make it so. A prankster in the back row called out, will this be on the final? Laughter erupted, and Professor Russell smiled. You can bet on it, he said. I may believe something to be true because it's what I have been taught, but if I am not certain that the thing is true, this is an acknowledgement that the thing may be false. And if I acknowledge that the thing may be false, a story my father has told me, for example, or my Sunday school teacher, or a memory, I cannot be said to know it. Bottom line, belief is not knowledge. Truth lies somewhere beyond belief. I'll skip a section, but I also want to read a section that talks about travel. Both the philosophy professor and then another mentor later, a writing teacher that Ali has, talked to him about the importance of travel and seeing things and experiencing things as a way to feed your imagination. So this is from another class that he's taking with Professor Russell. Professor Russell asked our class, what is consciousness? As usual, he was met with puzzled looks, even from those of us who had read the assigned material for the day. Is it separate from the body? An energy that exists apart from the corporeal self, he asked. He'd started the class behind a podium, but now moved toward us, pacing the length of the front row while he posed his questions. Or is consciousness merely cognitive awareness, the recognition that a thing exists? How, in that case, does consciousness relate to the thing of which it is aware? Are their existences separate, or does one depend on the other? I raised my hand and Russell nodded. I like the idea, the sense of belonging that unified consciousness implies, I said. If consciousness exists at all, it makes us almost immortal, doesn't it? As long as it exists, we exist. The entire class laughed, but Russell nodded vigorously. Absolutely, he said. In fact, in some religions, that's where the idea of heaven comes from, the notion that when we die, we merely move to a different realm within the universal consciousness. So how do we find this consciousness? Asked a guy in the back of the room. How do we see what's inside it? He was laughing as he asked the question, which encouraged more laughter from the class. All you have to do is travel and keep your eyes open, Russell said. That's the key to the locked door of consciousness.
Thank you.
And while I'm talking about travel, maybe I'll read just one more section on this subject. Ollie has been talking to a writer named Bruce Owens. And Bruce Owens is one of his mentors and has been helping him looking at some of his work. And Ollie has given him a piece of writing that is set in Vietnam. And so this is what Bruce Owens is reacting to. This story about the girl in Vietnam is quite moving. Real emotions, life and death, secrets, says Bruce Owens. Have you been to Vietnam? No, I confess. I didn't know Americans could go there. I mean, I've read a lot about it, the war and after. He seems to like the story in which Oliver rescues an orphan in Hanoi. I know it's crap. At least I thought it was crap. Ah, yes, the war, that fucking war. For some of us, pro and con, it will never be over. You were in the army? Briefly, Owens says. He sips from his drink, stares into the amber. I wish I knew what he's thinking, what he's not saying. How is one in the army only briefly? What happened? Was he wounded? I'm not sure how to ask. Were you... What if you went there, he says. My question forestalled. Went where? Vietnam. Me? Sure, or somewhere else. You're sending this Oliver fellow all over the place in these stories. Thailand, Switzerland, Mexico, Vietnam. Why should he have all the fun? Why not go yourself? Nothing stopping you, is there? Travel, see the world, and then write about it. Think of the stories you'll be able to tell. Why not? Well, there's work, for one thing. Teaching? Nonsense. There's always more work. Another teaching gig or something even more rewarding than grading essays by kids who don't know a semicolon from a smiley face. Travel will improve your resume, not to mention your writing. Travel is the key to the locked door of consciousness, Professor Russell had said, but it's not possible. And there's Mary. That's my girlfriend, fiance. Not really my fiance, but that now seems inevitable. She'll wait, won't she? They do wait sometimes. Do you really think I should? Absolutely, my young friend. Travel deepens the soul. You're young. Now is the time for you. Join the Peace Corps or something. Build a hospital in Africa, dig wells in Nicaragua, or just take off on your own. Be a beachcomber. See the world. The world, I say. That's right. And whatever you're looking for, whatever you're writing about in these stories, you'll find it there. Out there. Whatever I'm looking for, Uncle Scotty is out there.
Thank you. I was taking a lot of notes while you were reading, and I haven't had a chance to read your book, but I imagine just, you know, from what you've been saying now and talking about, you know, what you read, that he appreciated college for the rules and the maps to follow, the kind of character that we can see Ollie probably is. And then I love, you know, what he's learning about truth from his professor and his mentors. I think that's, you know, as a reader, that's something I can certainly relate to. You know, we sort of just accept whatever truth people tell us when we're young, and then you get a little older and it's like you dismantle those truths or life dismantles them for you, and then it's this whole process of like putting those pieces back together to find this truth in a way that you can understand. So it makes it, yeah, really, really intriguing to think about this character who really likes rules and maps to follow, just going out and traveling. And so I was thinking about that, you know, as an author, but before you were an author, being this international lawyer, you obviously traveled a lot. You've lived abroad. I imagine that you have a favorite place or two that you really connected with. So in the book, as Oliver's new to all this traveling, is there a place that he truly connects to, one place versus another, that is like the place where he begins to make that change into becoming the man he will become?
Well, with every stop that he makes on this search, he learns more about himself. I won't say where the last stop is, but when he gets there, he does feel a connection to that place, and he really makes some discoveries about himself there. And it was fun choosing the places that he went. I have to say, because so I mean we haven't talked about it, but obviously the name Oliver's Travels is an allusion to Gulliver's Travels, and I don't make a perfect correspondence to that uh, book, but Gulliver did go to 4 uh, places, and so Ollie goes to 4 places. And like Gulliver, he learns something about those societies, but also he learns a lot about himself in those places. So I will say that the first place he goes is Singapore. And one reason he goes there is because I lived there for 10 years and know it very well. I have to say that in this book, he doesn't get too deep into Singapore society. He's teaching at the Singapore American School, which is kind of like an enclave of American society. So he doesn't really become a Singaporean in any way, but I chose it just because I like Singapore. It seemed like a good place for Oliver or Ollie. When I lived there, some of us used to call it the Disneyland of Asia because it seemed like kind of an artificial place. It's so clean and so perfect, too perfect. It's a gorgeous country, but it seemed like a place that Ollie could wet his feet in. Not too foreign, just foreign enough. And then the other reason for him to go there is it's basically on the other side of the planet. So he's turning himself upside down by going there. And that seemed like an important step. And of course, the other reason, sort of related to the first reason, is that he's taking his wife with him, Mary, and he can't convince her to go anyplace more exotic. There's a scene in the book where he suggests to her that they join the Peace Corps, and she gets this picture of them, in a grass hut in Africa, and she won't do that. So Singapore she could accept.
Nice. So, was there any part of your past life that really translates into your current life as an author?
In this book, the main part of it that really is from my previous life is Ollie's philosophical bent and his dependence on the purely logical. He's we've talked about the fact that he's concerned about the source of knowledge and questioning any doubts that might arise about something that happens. And so that's, actually somebody else was asking me this question, and I can go either way on this. Am I this way because I was a lawyer, or did I become a lawyer because I was this way? Because I think it's clearly a useful tool for a lawyer to be able to argue logically, and that's really the part of my career that is in Ollie. And so this is my 5th book, and I have not yet written about lawyers. There's a lawyer who is the main character in one of the stories in one of my collections. But I haven't written about lawyers. The novel that I'm working on now, however, is about a lawyer. The main character is a lawyer And in fact, it's a lawyer who goes to Singapore. So it's not me. It's a woman from New York who is completely different from me, but at least I understand the law that she practices. So.
Well, I wonder if you'd like to read one more excerpt. And I also want to make sure that people know in the audience that you're welcome to ask questions. I keep forgetting to mention that in between conversations with Clifford. Just send a note to me in the chat, and then we can ask your question. But I'd love to hear some more reading from you.
Okay. Let's see. Let me read. I'll read from the very beginning of the book. And so that doesn't really need any setup, but it does bring us to the question of Scotty. And so we might talk a little bit more about Uncle Scotty. I should have gone west, like the man said. After graduation, I should have thrown my shit into the back of my ancient Impala, my sister's cast off when she had twins, and upgraded to a kid-friendly Subaru, and headed west. And by west, I don't mean Terre Haute or any of the other small cities within spitting distance of Cambridge, Indiana, my tiny college town. I mean California. I mean getting on I-74, hooking up with I-80, and coasting for a couple thousand miles until I hit the Pacific. Once I got there, I'd have found work in San Francisco or LA, or maybe I'd have kept going, explored Micronesia, Japan, Southeast Asia, India. Travel, my favorite teacher, Professor Russell, said to me more than once, is the key to the locked door of consciousness. Travel. That's what I should have done, especially after what happened between me and Russell, which I don't even want to think about. Instead, I've come home to the single-story brick ranch in Indianapolis where I grew up, where my divorced father lives with my wounded warrior older brother. Dad starts in on me before I've had a chance to unload the car. Ollie, is that a tattoo? He asks from the front stoop, pointing at the tribal design on my bicep, a recent acquisition meant to demonstrate my independence. No, the irony isn't lost on me. He shakes his head. You kids with your tattoos and pierced whatevers. For the record, I do not have any pierced whatevers. He leaves me alone while I move into my old room, then lets me have it, not for the first time. Why didn't you major in engineering or some useful subject that would get you a real job? Dad, who never went to college, is a salesman, widgets or automotive parts or something. Philosophy is useful, I say, probably without much conviction. I'd started out in pre-med, but that didn't last long. I learned how to think. There's no skill more valuable than thinking. My father snorts and shakes his head again, but that's not the end of his complaints. My hair, too long. My grades, dismal. My job prospects, nil. My mother, a bitch. I've been home 5 minutes and already I have to leave. What am I doing here? I notice how shabby the house has become. When she still lived here, my mother subscribed to Architectural Digest and House and Garden. On a shoestring, she made the living room look like a photograph from one of those magazines, vases filled with fresh flowers, colorful sofas and chairs with contrasting pillows, impressionist reproductions on the walls. She worked her magic outside too, and we had the nicest yard in the neighborhood. A graceful maple tree dominated, hedges surrounded the lawn, and wide flower beds lined the drive. Now, it looks as if the lawn hasn't been mowed yet this year, or the hedges trimmed, or the flower beds weeded. Inside is no better. Dust-covered furniture, a pile of newspapers next to the sofa, tracks of mud from the front door, and there's a pungent, unidentifiable odor emanating from the kitchen. Rotten cabbage? Sour milk? I can't tell which. While my dad is at work, I'm left to my own devices. Watching daytime TV grows old fast, so I look around for something else to occupy my time. On the shelf below the coffee table, I come across one of Grandma Tucker's photo albums that's been sitting there for years, unopened since she died, I'd wager. I've forgotten about this album. I lift the cover, inciting a brief dust storm, and there's fat Grandpa Tucker in black and white, waving for the camera. On the next page is a fading Polaroid of Mom and Dad standing in a driveway somewhere. I have no idea where. They're squinting in bright sunlight and look like they might actually be happy. There's one of my sister Sally Ann in a cowboy hat sitting on a pony, my brother Q holding a string of tiny fish he caught, me in a bassinet. Then there are snapshots of people I'm less certain of. When Dad comes home, I point to one picture of him and a much younger man who looks a lot like him. Who's this? I ask. Me and Scotty, he says. Scotty? My brother. Uncle Scotty. I'd nearly forgotten about him, but I remember that face. What was it Mom used to call him? The world's traveler? No one has mentioned him in eons, I say. Where is he? Still exploring the world? Dead as a doornail, my father says. D-E-A-D, dead. But I thought, well, Dad disappears into the bathroom, where I know from experience he might be enthroned for hours. After my father's gone to bed, I pull out the album again and look at the picture of Scotty. Dead? I don't believe it. How could I not remember Scotty's death? They would have told us. Scotty the adventurer died while climbing Everest or surfing in Bali, gored by a rhino in Tanzania. There would have been a funeral, right? An obituary. I guess I was young, but surely I'd remember that. There would have been anguish and mourning, and then there would have been stories told about him in subsequent family gatherings. Remember the time when Scotty always loved this song, and what a shame Scotty isn't here to enjoy this. Thinking of him now, an image comes to me. Uncle Scotty playing basketball in the driveway with Q. I'm too little, barely able to hold the ball in my pudgy arms, but I watch. When he jumps for a rebound, arms outstretched, he soars. Like Superman, I thought then. Like a gazelle, I think now. And then another image, at the lake where we took summer vacations, my father's idea of travel being the long drive to a rented cabin in Minnesota. I'm wearing an orange life vest, a mere puppy waddling on the dock, crying for the greater adventure of water. Q wades in the reedy shallows, hunting minnows and crawdads, but Scotty swims out into the deeper, darker water and back with bold strokes, powering through the chilly lake, then emerging, leaping onto the shore like a mythological being. That's Scotty, a superhero who went off to conquer the world, leaving us all behind. Could I have been mistaken all this time? Did they tell me he was dead and I somehow got it wrong? Did I forget? So that's Scotty, and Scotty is then at the heart of the mystery. And that's who Ollie is looking for when he goes off on his quest.
That's a great description of him, out in the water, mysterious, and then climbing up like a mythological being. That's a great description. And, definitely makes me intrigued to hear more about the story and just that idea of, these blank spaces in history, and then how that drive for a character, fictional or non, to fill in those spaces in order to figure out who they are. I love that. I was wanting to ask too a little bit about, just as we get closer to the end of the hour, I know that from your blog, you keep a reading journal of the books that you're reading. And I wondered what you're reading these days, and if you find that you lean more towards one kind of story or another. Does that often trigger ideas for you when you set out to write your own work, whether it's a novel like Oliver's Travels or a short story?
Oh, really good question. So I just finished reading Washington Black, which is a fantastic novel, and it also involves a voyage. Very different characters, but it suggested to me a few things. for my future work. One is the way in which locations are described, but also the really distinct characters that she drew in that novel. I found fascinating. Those characters were so memorable. Even though I didn't love the ending of that novel, those characters will stay with me forever. And I think that's something that I would like to work on in the novel that I'm currently writing. I read a lot of all kinds of things. So I'm also currently reading a book that I really hate, honestly. So I won't even say what it is, but it's sort of science fiction, which I'm not a big fan of, or horror. I'm not really sure what it is, but I can't not finish a book when I start it. So that's, a lot of people say, just stop if you don't like it. But I keep thinking that eventually I'll get more out of it. I'm also, I usually read a couple of nonfiction books a month. I just finished, because my book club reads mostly nonfiction, I just finished Shakespeare in a Divided America, which is a brilliant book about how Americans have really viewed Shakespeare plays at crucial moments in our history, both from the early 19th century to Lincoln's assassination and so on, and what those plays have meant to various people. And the book I'm currently reading is Ayad Akhtar's Homeland Elegies, which I have convinced my book club to do for next month. So I have heard advice from other writers that one should not read fiction or something too similar to one's own writing while you're working on a project. But I'm always working on a project. So if I did that, I'd never read anything. And so I don't follow that advice. I'm reading all the time. I read all kinds of things, and things probably do influence me.
Yeah, that's, I mean, you can't help it, right? Everything around the world influences you no matter what. So, but still, you have your own unique voice, even if there's a book out there that sparks an idea in your mind. And I too find it difficult to put a book down, even though I'm not really enjoying it. It's almost like I keep turning the pages thinking, any minute now, it's going to change direction. But yeah, it's hard.
I should say, on the subject of influence, when I was working on Oliver's Travels, I was influenced intentionally. I mean, I wanted to imitate, to some extent, the work of Jenny O'Fill in her book, Department of Speculation, and then subsequently in her more recent book, Weather, because the voices in those books are pretty similar. And the thing that I liked about them were that those voices were funny, they were acerbic, and I tried to make Ollie. I mean, a friend of mine the other day referred to Ollie as being manipulative, and I think he is, but in a funny way. I mean, he's kind of snarky, and yeah. So that was, but that I intentionally did that. It was not unconscious.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's true that our craft grows the more that we read, because you find things that you love about an aspect of a story, or the way that an author approaches one thing or another, and then you also find the things that you don't like. So yeah, you can't help that either. Just before we go, I wondered, you've got so many things published as an author, and one of the things that I noticed too is the editor of this anthology of short fiction from a small planet. Is that, can you tell us a little bit about that anthology and the process of editing?
Yes, that has been a terrific project, and I'm going to take down my virtual background here so that I can show you this book. There we go. So it's actually a 3-volume series. Volume 1 was this beige one, Everywhere Stories, Short Fiction from a Small Planet. And I pitched this to Press 53 after my second book with them, because personally, I love to read stories set in exotic locations. And I knew lots of writers who write such stories, including, I mean, there's a whole community of former Peace Corps volunteers who write fiction, right? And I'm in touch with many people in that community. So I pitched the idea to Press 53. They loved the idea. We did an open call for submissions that was in Poets and Writers and Writers Chronicle and social media all over the place. And we had almost 800 submissions of short stories. And so the concept was that we would have no more than one story per country. And I was originally going to have 16 stories in the first volume, but the publisher said, let's go for 20. So we ended up with 20. And that was great. I'm a bit of a control freak, so I didn't get any help reading the 800 stories. So it took me a while to pick the 20 that I wanted. And I actually found a number that I didn't want to say no to, so that I held in reserve in case we did a second volume. So the first volume came out, I think that was 2014, I want to say, and it did very well, and it was well received. I was very happy with that. So we decided to do another one that would come out in 2016. I had the stories in reserve. I think that there were about 8. So I had to make another call for submissions. Didn't get 800 this time, but I did get a lot. And again, we did 20 new countries. Actually, we decided we would have, each volume would have one story in the United States. So 19 new countries in volume 2. And again, it was great. It was fun. I loved the stories we included. And we did it again in 2018. Or the third volume came out in 2018. Again, 20 stories, one story set in the United States and the other 19 in various other countries. So they just all have different colors. The last one was shocking pink here. If we were following the same pattern, we would have come out with another volume last year, but we took some time off, partly because I had all these other projects going on. But the publisher has talked to me about maybe doing a 4th volume. There are still, a couple hundred countries that we haven't touched, so we're 150 anyway. So
that's very cool. I love Press 53. They often come up with great books, whether they're collections or books from writings from one author in general. So that's fascinating. It would be cool to see, another volume and just kind of keep putting all those different countries all together. That's great. I can't believe that you read through 800 submissions. We have a current call for submissions now, nowhere near 800, but it's hard to get through all of them as one person. And I'm like you, I want to read all of them.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing that made it a little bit easier was that, once I had found the perfect story set in China, then I couldn't accept another story set in China. So that would eliminate some. I mean, I would look at them all just to make sure I got the best one set in that particular country. But, and then in volume 2, some people would send me stories that were set in a country that I had covered already in volume 1. So I couldn't take those. Mm-hmm. But, it was a really good exercise. And it was kind of an extension of the work I had done with Press 53. I was the co-founder and first editor of Prime Number magazine, which is a project of Press 53 also. And so for 5 years, I was editing stories there. So this was, the project overlapped with my tenure as editor-in-chief there, but kind of similar work.
Yeah, that's great. I love hearing about all your different experiences. It's just, I don't know, it's so nice to hear. I think one part I enjoy about doing these readings and discussion, not only to learn more about this book that you have, but to learn more about you as an author and how all of that work comes into play in the books that you create. So that's really cool. And it just, yeah, it's great to hear about all that. And thank you so much for being here today and for sharing a little bit from Oliver's travels. I'm excited to get a hold of it and take a look at it myself and read about this mystery of his search for his uncle, the mythical monster, whatever it was that you called it. That's so awesome. And yeah, I hope everybody will take a chance to look at Clifford's website, cliffordgarstang.com, and you can go to bookshop.org. The preferred bookshop site is the Book Dragons bookshop site, which is that's an independent bookstore near you?
Yeah.
Great. So you can go there and take a look at Oliver's travels. And if you see it on back order, don't worry, go ahead and place your order and you will get a copy. So thank you again so much for being here, Clifford. It's so nice to talk with you.
Thank you, Christy. I appreciate it. And thanks for everyone who's watching this video.
All right. Bye-bye.